All right, we're looking at Roman culture during the empire. And yesterday we were thinking about the different historical writers. And we delineated some of them. There's about 5 of them that we talked about yesterday. Make sure you look over those. Today we're going to move into those that were poets. So the first poet we have on our list is Virgil. Have you ever heard of Virgil? A couple of you have. He's considered the greatest Roman poet, and he exalted Rome as the ideal state. He wrote the epic poem, the Aeneid, I think is how you say it, right here, which is an epic poem based on Homer's Iliad. There's an expression that comes from Virgil that I'll bet you've heard. Love conquers all things. Have you ever heard that? That's Virgil. He also said, time is flying, never to return. You ever heard time flies? You probably heard that, right? Comes from that statement by Virgil. Here's a good one, and good advice for us. Let us go singing so far as we go. The road will be less tedious. You ever done that while you're traveling? Now, back in the days before everybody had a phone or some kind of a video game, Game Boy or anything like that, when we traveled together as families, and on those occasions when I was with a group of students and we were traveling somewhere, like from our youth going to summer Bible camp or something like that, we would sing as we went along. We would sing songs together. And it made the time go by more quickly. All right, so that's Virgil. Any questions about Virgil? The next one is Horace. After the death of Virgil, his close friend Horace became the poet of the Augustan age. He wrote about simple everyday things. His motto was, tell them the truth with a smile. You notice if you tell somebody something with a smile, it seems to go better. He also said, as riches grow, care follows, and a thirst for more and more. And isn't that the truth? Here's another statement he made. This is a fault common to all singers, that among their friends they are never inclined to sing when asked, but unasked they never desist. So in other words, he felt that singers were people that love to perform when nobody wants them to, and when someone asks them to, they don't want to. He also said, he who has begun has half done. Dare to be wise. Begin. Now, there, if you don't remember anything from Horace, remember that one. I think that's a pretty good one. Haven't you experienced that? That just getting started is sometimes the worst part or the hardest thing to do when you have a big assignment to work on, a paper to write, or research to do, or a job to do. And if you just get started, it gets easier. Right? You've experienced that, haven't you? And so that's why he said, he who has begun has half done. So just get started. He also said, life grants nothing to us mortals without hard work. Nothing comes without hard work. And he said, once a word has been allowed to escape, it cannot be recalled. Once a word has been allowed to escape, it cannot be recalled. That one and other statements by some of these wise men are very similar to what we find in the Bible, aren't they? You know, the book of Proverbs, I'm thinking, we were looking at in Bible class. There are statements that are similar to these things. But once you say something, you can't recall it. It's out there. All right, so Horace seems to be a wise person. You can see that he wrote lyric poetry about the simple times in early Roman history. Any questions about Horace? Okay, the next poet we want to look at is Ovid. Ovid wrote about mythology and love. His best known work is Metamorphoses, which is a collection of over 200 myths of the ancient world, and this poem is 12,000 lines long. That'd be difficult enough to read, let alone memorize. It begins with the beginning of the earth and ends with Julius Caesar becoming a star. And he didn't mean a star like we think of it as somebody really popular. He actually meant a star up in the sky. All right, so that's Ovid. Any questions about him? Comments? Next we come to Juvenal. Juvenal wrote bitter satires on the loose morals and social problems of the empire. So he was kind of a critic of the way things were morally in the empire. Next we come to plays. Who are some of the playwrights? The first one, and I have probably the wrong letter there, unless you don't have it divided up according to these categories. The first playwright was Plautus and Terence. This was mostly a copy of the Greek style. Greek plays were designed to instruct, as you may remember. Roman plays were designed just to entertain. So the Roman playwrights don't offer much. They're just basically copying the Greeks, except they're looking more for entertainment. Now let's look at the area of philosophy. In the philosophy area of literature, we have, first of all, Cato. And I just have one statement by him that I think is pretty instructive. So let's see if we can follow this. Think about this. He said, I would much rather have men ask why I have no statue than why I have one. Okay, what does he mean by that? What's he saying? I would much rather have men ask why I have no statue than why I have one. Matthew, what do you think?
Maybe like, so someone wouldn't tell him that he's like, you wouldn't want someone telling him that he's not good enough to have a statue rather than say that he is good enough and he should have one.
Right, exactly. Very good. So it's better to have somebody say, hey, how come you're not being honored? Rather than to say, how come you're being honored? Right? Have you ever experienced that? Somebody wonder why you got an award? Did anybody ever wonder why you haven't gotten an award? Has that ever happened to you? Well, maybe it will someday. Better to be on that end than on the end of why do you have one. Okay, another philosopher we have is Seneca. His name's mentioned before. And he said something that I'm sure you've heard. It's quality rather than quantity that matters. You've heard that, haven't you? It's quality rather than quantity. You know the difference, right? Anybody need a refresher on the difference between quality and quantity? All right. He also said, it's not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor. Not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more. Why? Because the man who has too little can be what we talked about in chapel this week, right? He can be what? Remember chapel this week? That was a whole day ago. What do we talk about in chapel? In his poverty, he might be what? We're not contradicting what he is. In chapel, we talked about being content. Do you remember that? Do you not remember Chapel? So he's poor, but he might be content. So the one who has too little might be content, but the one who keeps wanting more, no matter how much he has, he's the one that's poor because he keeps wanting more and more. He's not content with what he has. Seneca also said, fire is the test of gold, adversity of strong men. What does he mean? What is the idea? Fire is the test of gold. What's that? What's that part mean? How is fire the test of gold? How is fire used in making gold? Or why is it used? I'm sure you've been told before, when you heat gold or silver, you heat to get the impurities out of it. Haven't you learned that someplace along the line? The impurities come up to the top, and so you skim off the impurities, then you have a purer gold. So fire brings about that pure gold. It's the test of gold. Adversity is what then brings about strong men. So if you want to be strong, you know you need to face some adversity. That will help make you stronger. Who was it that said that which does not kill you makes you stronger? You ever heard that? I don't know who said it. Maybe it was just in a movie. I don't know. I remember saying kind of the same thing. All right, so there we have the philosophers, Cato and Seneca. Now, we want to look at some Greeks that also had a contribution during the time of Rome. The Greeks didn't stop producing just because Rome was in charge of the world. There were some Greeks that continued to do some things that are worthy of note. One of these is Plutarch. Maybe you've heard his name before. He's probably the most famous Greek writer during the Roman Empire period. He wrote biographies that compared the lives of important Greek and Roman men. Secondly, we have Galen. Galen was a physician whose encyclopedia became the accepted medical authority of the Middle Ages. So he wrote this during the Roman Empire, compiled this medical encyclopedia, and it was used by people for hundreds of years on up into the Middle Ages in Europe. And then the third Greek that contributed greatly to culture was Ptolemy. Ptolemy was an astronomer and a mathematician. He promoted the idea that the Earth was the center of the universe, which is called the geocentric theory, as you have read. All right, any comments on these Greeks that contributed during the Roman Empire? I want you to take a little bit of a sidetrack here and look at what we call the Romance languages. I want you to be exposed to this. How many of you have ever heard of the Romance languages? Okay, that doesn't mean saying I love you in a lot of different ways. It's talking about certain language groups that arose from Rome, Roman. Now, the Romance languages that developed from Latin, which was the language of Rome, are French, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian, and Spanish. Those are called the Romance languages. That's why it's very helpful in understanding any of these languages to know some Latin, because a lot of the words come from Latin. The same is true to a lesser extent in English. Old English was a Germanic language. Well, then William the Conqueror of Normandy came to England. He's called William the Conqueror because he conquered England, in a sense. He won a battle, became king in 1066. And he brought French to England. England, or Anglo-land, was Germanic, but now French was introduced. And they kind of combined together to form what's called Middle English, which is a forerunner of what we speak today. It's a mixture of Old Germanic and French languages, and so that about half of modern English can be traced to Latin. So that's why knowing the Latin helps to understand English too. And if you're going into the fields of law, medicine, or science, you need to know Latin, because a lot of terms that are used in those areas are Latin terms. Scientists use Latin. Scientific names, legal medical terminology are all Latin. So, any of you interested in going into law? Anybody thinking about that? Medicine? Science? Your parents' couch for the rest of your life? All right, well, if you do decide others, you'll need Latin. In religion, Latin has been important. The Roman Catholic Church preserved the Latin language. Catholic masses were said in Latin until the 1960s. So before the 1960s, you could go to any Roman Catholic church in the world, and if you knew Latin, you would understand what they were saying. If you didn't know Latin, it didn't matter where you were, you wouldn't understand what they were saying, because it was all in Latin. And that was changed in the 60s to be able to use the common languages. All right, so a little bit about the Romance languages. Let's continue now looking at Roman culture and considering art and architecture. The distinctive feature of Roman art is using portrait busts, which are head and shoulder statues. The Greeks were known for full statues of people, very athletic looking, things like that. But the Romans seem to be content with using just the head and shoulders. And so I have some examples here, like this. So these are examples of Roman busts. That was their art. Very realistic looking heads. They were pretty good at showing different moods too. There's a nice fellow. And even capturing beards on the bust. And even some before their time hairdos. So those are the Roman busts as a good representative of their art. That's not the only art they did. They also engaged in what is called relief sculpture. That's a sculpture in which the figures project out from a flat background. That, in my mind, has to be very difficult. One of the most difficult things to do. I don't know if any of you have ever done that in art or not, but you can see it's a 3D. It actually is 3D. The figures are standing out from the background. Are any of you artists? Have you taken any art? Do you ever do anything like that?
We did like printing, where we have to
Printing?
cut it this like that.
Yeah, so that's sort of similar in a way. But remarkable how detailed those relief sculptures are. You ought to be familiar with that term, a relief. And when you hear the word relief, you ought to picture that these are figures that are standing out from the background. Arches and vaults are part of the architecture that the Romans give us. And we'll look at a picture of those in a moment. And engineers were able to create large indoor spaces enclosed by massive domes through the use of arches and vaults. And then also we have the implementation of aqueducts. We're familiar with that. I think the very first page we read in your textbooks about Rome were about the roads and the aqueducts. And of course that brought water supplies to cities. Okay, we should have some pictures coming up of these. Here is an arch, and you can see by putting the stones together just so. And we saw this in the video we watched the other day, remember? If you put them together, you might have a wood frame holding it in place until you get it all there, but once you get all the stones together, the stones are against each other and they keep the whole thing from falling down. There's
a drawing of how a vault would look. Whoops, thought I had a picture of an aqueduct. Hey, we've seen enough pictures of them. I guess I thought we don't need to see any more. As far as architecture and engineering goes, a large part of Rome's success was due to the importance that Rome placed on building and maintaining the empire's infrastructure. That is, all those things that are internally part of a country, which included aqueducts, bridges, dams, harbors, roads. Those are all things that keep things moving, keep things going in a country or empire. They also built many public buildings. You can tell when you travel all over the Mediterranean world, you can tell where the Romans were, because there's usually an amphitheater of some kind in every city. I've seen a lot of ruins in a lot of different places, and usually there's an amphitheater all the way from Ephesus down to Petra, and other places in between. Colosseums, basilicas, government offices, palaces, public baths, theaters. A lot of public buildings built by the Romans. Architecture, the basic style was copied from the Greeks, and you'd expect that because the Romans were imitators, weren't they? They copied almost everything they did. The arch was copied from the Etruscans. Remember, they were the ones that occupied Italy before the Latins and then Rome. And of course, we have the dome and the vault that we've talked about already as part of the architecture. Okay, I did have a picture of an aqueduct just in case you'd forgotten what they look like. There's an aqueduct bringing water into the city. And here's another picture of it. You can see how big it is. Here I am standing on a rock, and you're not going to reach that high. So massive structures. Here's a drawing that shows a bridge over the Tiber River in Rome. And you can see the use of the arch there. And we also have the Colosseum, which is an oval amphitheater in the center of the city of Rome. Probably one of the most famous landmarks in the world, and certainly the most famous in Rome. Built of concrete and sand. The largest amphitheater ever built. One of the greatest works of architecture and engineering ever. So there's a picture, a small picture of it, the ruins of it. You know, of course, at one time it was up that high, all of it. Just an amazing place. We saw some pictures of that in the video we watched as well. Okay, now let's talk about the Roman games. There are certain activities which we might call games. Just a couple of them we want to talk about for the last thing today. First of all, how many of you have heard of the Circus Maximus? That term, Circus Maximus. Okay, a couple of you. That's what was held in Rome. It was over 250,000 people that gathered regularly to watch the chariot races. So the Circus Maximus was where they held the chariot races, or was the chariot races. And I imagine that and circus has the idea of what? What do you think of a circus? I know I'm not asking what you think of, but you'll think of elephants and tightrope walkers and all that. But what the word itself, circus, where do you think that comes from? Can you think of a word that is similar to that might be the origin of the word circus? Why don't you begin to think this way? When you see a word, think about where did that word come from? You think of any words that sound similar to circus? Nobody? Circle? Circle, circus? And of course, if you have a chariot race, not exactly a circle, it's more like an oval, but they are racing around a sort of a circle. Okay, the other kind of game was at the Roman Colosseum, and we just saw pictures of that, and that's where the gladiators fought. I'll show you
Circus Maximus.
Was here. Chariots would race around. Exciting stuff.
You want to see that reenacted? Get a copy of the movie Ben-Hur. I'm trying to think about another movie. Did another Gladiator had chariot race or not in it?
And here's a picture of the Colosseum. I think you understand that at one time there was a floor over this part, and then down here below the floor was where all the animals were kept, and the gladiators waited. Sometimes they would have the floor open up, and there'd be a platform come up out of the bottom with animals, and different ways for animals or gladiators to make their entrance. And then, of course, the people are seated all around watching it. They were able even to. This was so tight that they were able to flood this with water and put boats in their ships, small ships, and have sea battles that people could watch as well. Amazing. Amazing place.
All right, tomorrow we're going to watch some more video about Rome to help expand our knowledge of Rome through the Drive-Through History series. And then following that, we're going to start looking at the religious beliefs of Romans. So make sure you come back.